Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a special ReidOut roadshow from the legendary Manuel's Tavern in Atlanta on the eve of voting in Georgia's U.S. Senate runoff. And the stakes could not be higher. It is the second time in 2 years that Georgia voters will decide not just who represents the Peach State and its values in the Senate, but also the direction of our country and whether Democrats will have a clear 51-seat Senate majority in the new Congress. Now, in a moment, I will be joined by the incumbent Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock. It is an election that's so critical that more than 1.8 million Georgians voted early, in some cases standing in long lines due to Georgia's 2021 voting law that took aim at mail-in voting after Peach State voters used it in 2020 to send President Biden to the White House and Democratic Senators Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock to the Senate, with Georgia voters choosing between Senator Warnock and a Republican opponent for what will be the second runoff in 2 years. Warnock spent the home stretch drawing distinctions with Trump's hand-picked candidate, Herschel Walker, and reminding voters of the urgency of their vote.
I'm not mad that he doesn't know what he's talking about. I'm mad that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and he thinks he ought to be a United States Senator. He's running for Senate. He's not just your uncle talking at the family reunion. We've got one more day to bring this thing home, and I want you to create a real 911 emergency. I want you to vote like it's an emergency.
As for Herschel Walker, here is his message to voters over the weekend.
God don't need a politician. He need that warrior. That's the one he put me here for. So why are they bringing pronouns in our military? Pronouns? What the heck is a pronoun? I'm sick and tired of that pronoun stuff.
Senator Raphael Warnock will join me shortly. But first up, joining me is Jason Johnson, MSNBC political contributor and host of the podcast A Word with Jason Johnson, and LaTosha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
It's nice to be in your town.
It is.
I love Atlanta.
Oh, it has been, and Atlanta is hot. We're hot Atlanta right now.
Atlanta's hot.
It's a little cool, but it's really hot.
Cool, but it's also hot. But then talk to me, because the thing is, Georgia has to vote. It's like Georgia's voting like every 18 months there's another election. And you're out here in these streets, in the bus, in the blackest bus in America. Right. Fabulous. What is your motivating message, and how motivated are the voters to do this again?
You know, it's really interesting. It seems like I've been out all day today, and it seems that voters are actually very resolved and very clear about how critical this election is. And so there's actually more energy on the ground, it feels like, in this period than it was in the primary. I think people are very, very focused. But yes, we are tired. There is an element. But what I'm really, really tired of is not having representation that literally is going to represent us, that we have the Republican Party to handpick a candidate, pluck them out of Texas with Trump, and put them here and say that at the end of the day, they should be senator. No, I think that the people of Georgia are going to send him back to Texas where he belongs.
And not even just that, but somebody who the current lieutenant governor says is the worst candidate. He said, let's just play it. Can we play it? This is Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan.
This wasn't the right brand for Republicanism. And I think Herschel Walker will probably go down as one of the worst Republican candidates in our party's history.
Now Jason, I'm just going to say I'm staring in Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, Roy Moore, Lauren Boebert, John Kennedy, who I think he's Foghorn Leghorn when he wants to be, Rick Scott, Medicare fraud, Blake Masters, Dr. Oz, J.D. Vance, and Doug Mastriano. Now, so there have been other candidates. I mean, Tuberville is not exactly a genius.
Right.
But none of those guys know how to debate whether they want to be a werewolf or a vampire, right? So they're not that bad. They're not that bad. It's interesting. What I have seen consistently from my friends here and people on the ground, it's not just what LaTosha says, the result, but actually like the numbers have said it. There's like 5-6% of people who have early voted who didn't vote in the midterms. Right. Those are enthusiastic people. Those are not people who have been convinced by, Herschel Walker that they need to participate. They're people who believed in Raphael Warnock. They were maybe playing for overtime, but it seems to be a situation where people are ready. They're voting. They're prepared. They want this to be over so that the governing can start sometime next spring.
Right. And this will be a six-year term, so that people will at least get a break, at least in this situation. But I wonder if that is a motivating factor, because there's data behind this. The great Hill Kapoor, our reporter at NBC, has, they've laid it out. There are something like 77,000 voters who didn't vote in November who are voting now. And is that because people maybe thought Warnock was a shoo-in before, and maybe now they're deciding?
I do think there are three reasons. I think some people really recognize how critical it was. I think there were people who thought that Warnock was going to win, and then when it went in a runoff, they were like, wait, listen, we got to do something different. And so I do think that was a motivating factor. I think there's also a motivating factor around the more that Herschel Walker talks, the more people are just really like, I really got to go vote now, right? I think they're more inspired to vote. And I think that's an inspiring factor. And then the third thing is, I think that there are really critical needs. While there are some implications around this election for nationally, that in Georgia, we have critical needs in Georgia. And I think the people of Georgia are saying, it is time, this is no more play, GA, that this is time for us to really make sure that we have representation, someone in the Senate that we're going to have for 6 years that are going to fight for the people of Georgia. And I think that's what we're seeing right now.
And have a seat.
Wow. All right.
Senator.
My goodness.
How are you?
I am doing great.
Are we just going to do this every 6 months? You're just going to keep running for election like every 6 months for the rest of your life? It's a lot.
I need the people of Georgia to do it just one more time.
People were... That was a chant earlier. So your fans that were here at this wonderful place, Manuel's Tavern, were chanting one more time. But I do have to ask you about that, because at a certain point, there has to be at least some exhaustion that's setting in for your supporters, for your campaign. And the fact that Georgia has built this runoff system, which we know is a vestige of, trying to get away from Reconstruction and trying to make it harder. What do you make of that idea that Georgia voters are tired? They're tired of having to keep saving the country over and over.
Listen, the people of Georgia are showing up, and I think it's because they understand how much is at stake. We've seen record voter turnout day after day after day. But here's the thing. I want people to understand that although we're seeing record voter turnout during this early voting period that ended Friday, we need people to show up again tomorrow. And look, folks who show up for something like this, they've already voted. They're going to vote. And so what I need them to understand is that even though you've already voted, your job is not done. Your job is to get everybody in your circle to vote. And for your friends who say to you, I'm tired, ask them, imagine how tired you're going to be if you have to have Herschel Walker as your senator.
So many questions that I could ask, but I'm going to start with
that would be truly exhausting.
I have to be honest. I have people that have texted and called me from all over the country and about your opponent. And what they feel that there's a certain amount of this election that is about the dignity, not just of the Senate, not just of the state of Georgia, but of black men, to be blunt. That people, they don't feel that there's a dignity to that campaign. Are you concerned that Herschel Walker and whatever his capacity is, his abilities are, that he is being used a bit by the other side, that the Republicans don't want him to be a senator, they want him to be a tool?
Here's what we know. We know that he is unprepared. We know he's unqualified. And it gives me no pleasure to say this, but as a preacher, I'm in the business of truth-telling. He's unfit to represent the people of Georgia in the United States Senate. And we've seen that time and time again. I do think it's disgraceful for someone who's running for public office to be unwilling to tell us the truth about the basic facts of their life, telling us lies that are easily disputable. Like, we all know that Herschel Walker is not a police officer.
I mean, he had a badge. And
he wears his lies as a badge of honor, literally. But we know he's not a police officer. And I think that tomorrow night, the people of Georgia are going to stand up and say, we know he's not a U.S. Senator also.
The governor of this state, who just was recently reelected, despite all of that, and, his lieutenant governor has been very clear, saying that he agrees with you about Herschel Walker. Yet Governor Kemp is campaigning for him and doing what he can to try to get him elected. Republicans are doing that because they still see him as a wedge in the Senate. 51 votes for Democrats versus 50. What difference, in your view, would that make for the country, for Georgia?
This race is about who is going to represent the 11 million people of Georgia for the next 6 years. I think we tend to focus on a very short-term kind of situation too often in politics, but this is a 6-year term. And 11 million people, I actually think who represents Georgia is going to matter. And what I have demonstrated in the less than 2 years that I've been in the Senate is that I will work with whomever I need to work with while being who I am, if it helps me to do good work for Georgia. And so it may be an inconvenient truth for some of my Republican friends, but I'm the 18th most bipartisan senator in the Senate. I know how to work with all kinds of people, and I think being a pastor may have something to do with that. It's just in my nature, my orientation. Amen, brother, to find a way to work with folks. And let me just say that it really is the honor of my life to represent the people of Georgia in the United States Senate. It is a special thing for the people of your state to say, when we think about our lives, when we look into the eyes of our children and imagine the future that we want for them, when we think about our aging parents and the burdens that come with the blessing of aging, since we can't all go to Washington, we trust you to go to Washington and to be thinking about us and thinking about our families. For me, that's a sacred trust. It's something I take very seriously, and the people of Georgia deserve a serious candidate. And that's why I believe that in a state that's not known to be a split ticket state, people are making the choices that they're making because, look, this race at this point, given my opponent, this race is not even about Republican versus Democrat, red versus blue, right versus left. It's right versus wrong. And I think people see that.
You talked about aging. You posted a picture of your mom, who is lovely, who went and voted. And, and you talked about the poignancy of her being able to vote for her son for the United States Senate, but just the ability to vote. You know, we still are in the South. Right. There are a lot of rules and laws that have been made that have made it more difficult to vote here, that have made it more difficult to vote in lots of states. But Georgia sort of was out front in that. Would one of your priorities if you get back into the United States Senate be to do something about voting rights? Because we know that is one of the pieces of unfinished business that was on President Biden's agenda. Can you see through to having a bill that could pass that with your vote as a 51st vote could actually get through the United States Senate?
Well, you know, I was John Lewis's pastor, and he continues to inspire me. John Lewis understood, as I do, that voting rights is not just one issue alongside other issues. Democracy is the very house that we live in. It is the foundation upon which we get to fight for all of the other things that we care about. And so one of the things that I do lament is that in spite of all of the things that we got done, and what an incredibly productive time, we got a lot of things done. I wrote a bill that capped the cost of prescription drugs, capped the cost of insulin. I am sad. I wish we could have gotten voting rights done, and it is something that I will continue to fight for because I believe in democracy, and I think that it's so important. And it is the reason why as we entered into this runoff and state officials began to play with people's votes and voices and began to say that we couldn't have Saturday voting because it was 2 days after a holiday, Thanksgiving, and a day honoring Robert E. Lee, I sued them, and we won. And, you know, state officials claimed their hands were tied. And so we took them to court, untied their hands, and then they showed us their hands because they then appealed the judge's ruling twice. We won twice. And that's the only reason we had Saturday voting a couple of Saturdays ago. Perhaps if we had passed the John Lewis voting rights bill, I wouldn't have had to sue just to get the working people of Georgia the opportunity that they needed to exercise their constitutional right.
Another issue that it really drove a lot of people to the polls was the issue of abortion and women's right to have self-determination over our own bodies. This is a state that's got one of the strictest abortion laws in the country. It's one of the hardest states in the United States for a woman to exercise her rights. And this is also a state that's got Tyler Perry and lots of industry and lots of folks coming from out of state to work here in the industry. Your opponent, Herschel Walker, was one of the few people that was running in this cycle to stand up and support Lindsey Graham's idea of a national ban on abortion, which is something Republicans would very much like to do. Do you think that is going to be a fight that you're going to have? Are we looking at trying to fight a national abortion ban?
Well, I think that's one of the things that's on the ballot tomorrow. And it is Herschel Walker's position on this is extreme. He says he wants a national ban, no exceptions. That would include rape, incest, the life of the mother. I think that's out of step with the women of Georgia, Democrats and Republicans. And it's one of the things that's on the ballot. And, you know, I get a lot of pushback from people who seem to think that they own the interpretation of the gospel. But I've been studying the scriptures my whole life. I'm committed to the faith. And as a pastor, I have a profound reverence for life. And as a pastor and a person of faith, I have a deep respect for choice. And I still think, as I've said time and time again, that a patient's room is too small and cramped a space for a woman, her doctor, and the United States government. But if we care about life, you know, Black women are dying 3 to 4 times the rate of white women in childbirth as a result of childbirth. And so if you care about life, we ought to find a way. That's a place where government could show up and address the obvious bias in our healthcare system.
It's what Jesus would do.
I think it's exactly what Jesus would do.
Senator and Reverend Raphael Warnock, I got to come to your church and check out your service one day.
Can
I come down?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Anytime.
Very much. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Best of luck.